I would like to go ahead and introduce our presenters to you. Our presenters today are Sandra Hughes-Hassel and Amanda Hitson. Sandra Hughes-Hassel, PhD, is a professor and coordinator of the School Library Media Program in the School of Information and Library Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In her current research, she focuses on social justice issues in youth library services and the role of school library media specialists in education reform. She teaches courses in services to diverse youth populations, materials for young adults, and the development of school library media programs. Amanda Hitson is a recent graduate and research assistant at the School of Information and Library Science of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She graduated with a Master of Library and Science degree yesterday, so let's congratulate her. Congratulations, Amanda. And hopes to begin working as a school library media specialist next school year. Her research has primarily focused on the literacy of African American male youth and multimodal forms of storytelling. And I will now turn the session over to Dr. Hughes-Hassel and Ms. Hitson.
Thank you, Kimberly. We want to begin today by thanking all of you for joining us. Almost 300 people signed up for the webinar, including K-12 teachers and administrators, public and school librarians, faculty from schools of education and schools of library and information science, and members of the nonprofit organizations. Clearly, this is an important topic. Our overarching goal for today is to begin a dialogue, a conversation about how the education, library, and nonprofit community can better support the literacy development of African American male youth in the United States. For the past 4 years, I've been fortunate to receive several grants to explore this issue. I've also had graduate students to work with who share my passion in this area. Today, Amanda and I are going to share with you some of what we've learned from our own work, from the research of others, and from working with teachers, librarians, and members of national and local nonprofit organizations. As importantly, we want you to share with us and with each other what you have learned from your experiences. As I said, we are going to begin a dialogue. As we move through the presentation, as Kimberly said, we posed questions for you to consider. As we're talking, please feel free to respond to the questions using the chat function of Blackboard. We'd also encourage you to follow us on Twitter and to tweet about the webinar. As Kimberly said, we will compile your comments and share them with you later. I'd like to begin by sharing some statistics that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but I want to share them to center us on the issues that African American males face. The literacy rates for African American male students are lower than they are for any other demographic. The most recent National Association for Educational Progress report found a 25-point gap between black and white students. Only 14% of African American male 4th graders and 8th graders performed at or above the proficient level on national reading tests in 2011. Poor test scores are not the worst consequence of illiteracy for these young men. Fewer than half of African American men graduate from high school. African American men make up only 5% of the college population, yet they make up 40% of the prison population. The unemployment rate is twice as high for African American men as it is for white men. When the recent unemployment statistics were released, African Americans were the only demographic for which the numbers had not decreased. African American adolescents and young adults are 8 times more likely to be victims of homicide than white people in the same age group. We are all here today because we believe these life outcomes are unacceptable, and in my opinion, they're an injustice. The good news is that they're not inevitable. They can be changed. However, doing so requires us to have a vision for the future of African American males and to make achieving that vision a priority. In a video filmed at the first annual campaign for Black Male Achievement Transformational Leadership Retreat, more than 60 African American leaders from across the country shared their visions of what they believe is possible for black men in America. We'd like to share a few of their visions with you. As you watch the video, we invite you to share your vision for the African American males that you work with. So Kimberly is going to start the video. Is she gonna get rid of this? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, literacy is a necessary component of empowering African American males to achieve these visions. Unfortunately, much of the discourse about literacy in African American male youth focuses only on raising test scores and closing the achievement gap. As this quote shows, literacy plays a much larger role in the lives of African American male youth. It is connected to intellectual growth, agency, voice, identity, resiliency, resolve, and a positive life trajectory. Dr. Alfred Tatum argues that by focusing primarily on the achievement gap, we are neglecting the life outcome gap, which, as the statistics on the previous slide show, is the real gap. Cultivating reading and writing as tools or pathways for human development, not just raising test scores, must be our focus. Our goal must be to teach African American male youth the importance of reading and writing out of school, and to provide them with opportunities to use literacy as a way to improve their life outcomes. So how do we do this? In 2011, UNC and North Carolina Central University received a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services to explore how community organizations can work together to help solve the literacy crisis facing African American male youth. In June 2012, we held a 3-day working meeting that brought together 68 participants from around the U.S. representing multiple stakeholder groups, including K-12 educators and administrators, school and public librarians, higher education faculty, and representatives from nonprofit groups such as the Council of the Great City Schools and the Southern Poverty Law Center. The summit included keynote addresses by Dr. Ernest Morrell, Professor of English Education and Director of the Institute for Urban and Minority Education at Teachers College, and Dr. Alfred Tatum, Professor of Literacy, Language and Culture, and Director of the University of Illinois Chicago Reading Clinic. There were panel sessions by researchers and practitioners, and perhaps most importantly, there was a panel discussion featuring 6 African American male students. The summit resulted in 7 themes that we believe provide insight into how we can better support the literacy development of African American males. Setting high expectations is critical for success. We need to provide instruction that is culturally congruent, using materials that are authentic and relevant to their lives. We need to use powerful text in our literacy instruction. We need to connect writing and reading. As we connect writing and reading, we're cultivating voice and agency. We need to take advantage of the connection between popular culture and literacy. We know many of these young men are very interested in popular culture, so let's take advantage of that and use it in our literacy instruction. And finally, we need to develop a network of support. In the next slides, we'll discuss each of these in some detail. So the first one is setting high expectations. Focus on success. Push them beyond their expectations for themselves. They expect to be pushed. They lose respect for people who let them do what they want. Students will meet the expectations you set for them. Phrases such as these were heard repeatedly throughout the 3 days of the summit, from the speakers, the participants, and the young men themselves. The research is clear. Setting low expectations does not improve the achievement of anyone, especially African American male youth. Instead, setting low expectations sanctions silence, stifles intellect, and suppresses agency. Yet often educators who work with black male youth tend to lower their expectations, to turn down the volume, to expose them to less. Setting high expectations is related to self-efficacy, the belief that you can successfully complete a task or execute a desired behavior. Positive self-efficacy has been linked to key literacy skills. For example, it has a positive influence on reading comprehension at the elementary level and compositional writing at all levels. It also has a long-term academic ramification, including whether students graduate from high school or college. An example of a program in higher education that has taken advantage of setting high expectations is the Centennial Scholars Program at North Carolina Central University. The focus of that program is on preparing African American males to be academically, socially, and emotionally competitive in a global society. Dr. Kevin Rome, who founded the program at NC Central, told Summit participants that when he started talking about the expectation that the students who participate in the program must maintain a GPA of 3.0 or higher, the response from some of his colleagues was, "That's too high." When we look at what's happening on our campus, that's unrealistic. His response, "That's okay. We're going to start our program, and we're going to have high expectations because we know that students meet the expectations that you set. Why would we start a program with an expectation of them achieving a 2.5? To me, that would be a waste of resources. Now, today, the expectation is a 3.5, and the students are meeting it." He also shared that when they recruit at local high schools, students no longer just say, "I want to go to NC Central." They now say, "I want to go to NC Central and be a Centennial Scholar." Another theme that emerged from the summit is the need for us to utilize authentic and relevant instruction and materials with African American male youth. The research shows that when African American male students do not see themselves in instructional materials, when the teaching strategies we use are in conflict with their culture, the message these young men can receive is that learning is not for them, that it's unrelated to their lives. This is particularly true for literacy. Studies conducted over the last 20 years have found that using culturally congruent instruction and culturally relevant literature increases literacy engagement and motivation, improves reading, recall, and performance, addresses phonological awareness gaps and contributes to fluency, and improves students' abilities to engage with complex text. It also impacts their life outcomes. In particular, it supports their racial identity development, connects them with role models from the African American community, and introduces them to potential career paths. So what do we mean by culturally congruent instruction? A number of scholars have written about this topic, including Gloria Latson-Billings, James Banks, and Lisa Delpit. Today we're going to focus on the work of Dr. A. Wade Boykin. Dr. Boykin is a professor and director of developmental psychology graduate program at Howard University, and I'd like to thank Dr. Pauletta Bracey, who's a member of our group here, for introducing me to his work. Boykin has identified 9 dimensions of African American culture that he believes need to be incorporated into our work with African American males if we want them to be successful. These themes are African in origin, and Boykin argues that they have been maintained and transmitted across generations in communities and families of African descent throughout the world. He suggests that each of these dimensions is found in the lives of many African American children in the United States, particularly those of low income, who are more likely to be more distant from mainstream values and practices. The 9 dimensions are spirituality, affect, oral tradition, harmony, the social perspective of time, expressive individualism, verve, communalism, and movement. Boykin's research suggests that African American children participate in a culture that is highly dynamic. They thrive in settings that use multimedia and multimodal teaching strategies, and they favor instruction that is variable, energetic, vigorous, and captivating. Unfortunately, research has found that many schools are rather unstimulating and monotonous places to be. They have a bureaucratic orientation where strict adherence to structured rules and regulations are rewarded, and any deviation from sanctioned procedures results in disciplinary action. This is particularly true for African American males who are suspended at much higher rates than white males. On the next 5 slides I'm going to share with you, we've given you some specific examples of instructional strategies that are culturally congruent and reflect the 9 dimensions identified by Boykin. You'll see that on the slides we've included the citations for the research that supports these strategies, and we've included all of the reference material at the end so that you can read more about these strategies and that you can also locate others. As I go through these slides, please share ways that you've used culturally congruent instruction with the African American males that you work with, and tell us how they have responded. One of the 9 dimensions that Boykin identifies is oral tradition. He argues that African American culture is steeped in oral tradition, that there's a preference for oral and auditory modes of communication in which both speaking and listening are treated as performances, and which and in which the ability to use alliterative, metaphorically colorful, and graphic forms of spoken language are emphasized and cultivated. We can capitalize on this preference for oral and auditory modes of communication by incorporating storytelling, poetry, spoken word, reader's theater, and songs into our literacy instruction. We can also provide opportunities for middle school and high school students to examine African American vernacular English as a legitimate language register and to compare it to other language registers. Finally, we can utilize literature circles as standard features of our literacy instruction. One experimental investigation conducted by McElvin, for example, found that using transactional literacy circles led to greater levels of student engagement and increased reading comprehension in a sample of 4th and 6th graders. Affect is another dimension identified by Boykin. In the African American community, Boykin argues there's an emphasis on emotions and feelings, together with a special sensitivity to emotional cues and a tendency to be emotionally expressive. This means we need to understand the lived experiences of African American male youth and how they respond to those experiences. We need to provide them with opportunities to read texts that connect to their lives and to write about what is meaningful to them. Later in the presentation, Amanda's going to share some poems with you that 2 young black men wrote. These poems convey strong emotions, feelings that might make us uncomfortable. But if we want African American youth to engage with literacy, then we must allow them to express their real selves, their real lives. Verve movement and expressive individualism are 3 additional dimensions. African American children have a propensity for relatively high levels of stimulation and for action that is energetic and lively. Rhythm, percussiveness, music, and dance are seen as central to their psychological health. And there's an emphasis on spontaneous and genuine personal expression. This means learning activities must be designed that enable African American males to move as they learn. Quiet activities need to be altered with active learning. And probably most importantly, we need to be patient with the outgoing nature of African American males. We need to develop strategies for building on their need to be active and expressive, rather than trying to control it. One example is during read-alouds. During read-alouds, while white children may indicate their engagement with eye contact, silence, and laughter when appropriate, African American children may talk back to the text. They have a dialogue, engage in the dialogue with the characters. This blurs the story world with their real world. They may dramatize the movements of the characters, for example, making noises, moving, as they think the characters might be moving. And they might talk over the text. Larry Sipe, who was a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, talks about a little boy named Kieran. He was a kindergartner who responded to his teacher's question, "What do you think this story, Red Riding Hood, might be about?" And this is what Sipe said. Kieran, with the widest of grins, replied, "Probably she read, and she write a lot, and she live in the hood." To understand this response, it's necessary to point out that Kieran was one of the most story-wise of the children in his class. He knew very well, and he knew that his teacher was aware that he knew what Red Riding Hood is about. Rather than responding seriously to the teacher's question, he decided to perform with an astonishingly clever series of puns. He just deliberately misunderstood read as the past tense of read and interpreted riding as writing. As well, he gave a colloquial urban twist to hood. So this is an example of a child talking over the text, and in many classrooms this kind of behavior would have been reprimanded, would not have been allowed. But by talking to the text, dramatizing the text, and actually talking over the text, African American males are showing that they are engaged, that they are part of the literacy activities. Boykin notes that in the African American community there is a commitment to social connectedness, that social bonds and responsibilities tend to transcend individual privileges. He calls this dimension communalism. This means African American students learn best in small groups, where there's a great deal of interaction between the teacher and the students, and between the students and their peers. They also prefer to work in cooperative groups, rather than in situations where they're expected to be competing with their classmates. Over and over, the research shows that when African American students work together and help each other learn concepts, they learn them at a much deeper level. Janice Hale, who is a professor at Wayne State, recognizing that it's difficult in many schools, especially because of economic times, to lower the student-teacher ratio to the level it should be, suggests that schools partner with local black churches, that they actually have a local black church adopt the school. This builds on another dimension of African American culture, spirituality. Harmony is the final dimension that I'll talk about. Harmony is the idea that one's fate is interrelated with other aspects of life, and it's another one that's important to the African American culture. This dimension suggests that African American males will be more successful when literacy is taught in meaningful and interrelated ways. We need to make explicit the implications literacy has for their lives, their futures, and their communities. Finally, we also need to build on the shared domains of literacy between the African American church and the mainstream school. McMillan and Edwards argue that African American children who attend church regularly often have more literacy skills and more authentic practice in utilizing those skills than their counterparts. The disconnect, they say, may be that we don't recognize the skills that they bring to school, and so students may become bored and unmotivated by the way literacy instruction is approached at school. They've written a really great article where they've shared lots and lots of concrete strategies that teachers can use in their classroom, librarians can use in the library, that build on the kinds of literacy that's happening in the African American church. And I would really encourage you to read that article. One key aspect of culturally congruent pedagogy is using culturally relevant texts in literacy instruction. Providing culturally relevant text is important, but it's not enough. Alfred Tatum argues that the text we use in our literacy instruction must be powerful. They must empower African American male youth to take action in their own lives and in the lives of others. As he says, students want to know if the text is legitimate, not if it's at the right reading level. Unfortunately, many teachers struggling to meet the needs of low-achieving readers select text based on their students' reading level, ignoring their developmental level. Dr. Tatum shared with some participants an example of a well-meaning tutor who he observed using the Bernstein Bears book with a 16-year-old African-American male. While it was true that the book might have been at that young man's reading level, it certainly was not at his developmental level. Dr. Tatum noted that by focusing on improving his reading skills without regard to the content of the text, it limited and weakened the tutor's approach to instruction. More importantly, it also turned the student off to reading rather than engaging him. Dr. Tatum argues that in our literacy instruction, we need to use what he calls enabling text. Enabling texts are meaty. They deal with real-life issues and questions, philosophical, political, social, personal. They promote a healthy psyche, reflect an awareness of the real world. If they feature African American characters, then they focus on the collective struggle of African Americans. They recognize, honor, and nurture multiple identities. They demonstrate resiliency. They serve as a roadmap for being, doing, thinking, and acting, for helping young African American men see another way that their life might be. They're interesting and provocative, and they avoid caricatures. In our research, we've also found that many of them also include a mentor or a role model. Sometimes the mentor is an older African American man in the community, sometimes it's a peer, sometimes it's someone from another community. Enabling texts also provide counter stories to the dominant narrative about African American male youth that we see in the media every day. It's important that these young men and that we as a community recognize that they do have much to offer, that they are being very successful in many cases, and that the media is relying on stereotypes when it presents them. Perhaps most importantly, enabling texts provide a forum for discussions that are meaningful, engaging, and require African American males to think critically. On this slide, we're showing some examples of text that qualify as enabling text. Each of these texts honestly portrays characters, issues, problems, and environments that African American males might encounter. The texts challenge them to critically examine these challenges, whether they're challenges that are academic, social, economic, or personal. They provide them with models for their decision making, for that mentoring that they need. They feature protagonists who, while not perfect, are determined and resourceful problem solvers. And whether an African American male is growing up in urban poverty or in suburban affluence, developing resiliency is critical for long-term success. Dr. Tatum argues, though, that just putting these texts in the hands of African American males is not enough, that they need to be mediated by a teacher, a parent, a librarian, or some other adult. He says that without the chance to discuss their reading with others, to respond to their reading through writing, that these enabling texts cannot fulfill their true potential in the lives of these young men. In his book, Reading for Their Life, which you can see a picture of there, Tatum offers a framework for mediating text, and we've shown it here on this slide. The framework includes 6 components. Identifying the appropriate literacy platform is the first component. And you'll notice that here he's not talking about particular literacy skills. He's talking about these larger life outcomes that we want to work with developing and helping these young men develop their abilities to achieve. And you can see that's defining self, becoming resilient, engaging others, and building capacity. As a part of the literacy platform, it's also important to introduce the text, to select the passages and the vocabulary that you're going to use to get the students involved right away. Developing framing questions that are going to guide the instruction is important. Establishing a writing connection, again, recognizing that importance of connecting writing and reading, because that's what writing and reading do in the real world. They're connected. They're not disconnected the way we teach them in schools. Determining the format for the discussion, again, based on what we've said earlier, a lot of that format should be small group rather than whole group. And then finally, evaluating the discussion and students' ongoing needs in future discussions. Perhaps the most important component of the framework, and the part that is different from what we often do in schools, is introducing the student to the text in a way that makes him want to continue to read. We'd like to share a short video with you now in which Dr. Tatum discusses the strategy he uses for getting young men who are disengaged from reading to become interested. Oops, wrong one. On the next 4 slides, we've used an abbreviated version of Tatum's form to provide starters and essential questions for 2 enabling texts. And we'll just let you go through those. But again, recognizing that the important parts are determining what the literacy platform is, figuring out which part of the text you're going to use to actually get the students engaged in the work, and then coming up with the framing questions. And remembering that these framing questions are not recall questions, they're not comprehension questions. These are questions that ask the young men to think critically and to examine their lives and their world as it relates to the books. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Amanda.
Thank you, Sandra. To understand the connection between reading and writing, we have to look at literacy in a historical context. In the past, people have largely written for 4 reasons: to define self, become resilient, engage others, and to build capacity. And really, these are the same reasons many people write today, but they're not the reasons students write or are taught to write in schools. Writing has to be purposeful. So every summer, Dr. Alfred Tatum hosts a summer writing institute for Black male students between the ages of 12 and 17. And as inspiration for this institute, he looks back to the reasons African American men have written historically. In the late 1800s, African Americans were forming gender-specific literary societies across the country to collect resources, engage and educate members, and prepare the members to participate in public platforms. In these societies, writing was very purposeful. So this is the basis for his summer writing program. With this idea of collaborative literacy in mind, Dr. Tatum and his students create a community of brother authors, which are charged to write prudently and unapologetically, not only for themselves, but for future generations. To become a part of a storied lineage of Black authors, to create a new national vision by putting their voices and vision on record, to write new beginnings. So the brother authors write together, critique each other's writing, and learn from one another. And they work together to perform and publish their work. Now I'd like to share 2 poems that were written during the Summer Institute. As I share these poems, please share ways that you have encouraged African American males to write and the forms of writing you have found most successful. So this first poem was written by one of the brother authors on his first day at the Institute. He did not want to be there. His mother made him come, and he insisted to Dr. Tatum that he didn't have anything to say. But at the end of his first day, he had written this: "My mom don't like me. My family treats me like I'm a person on the street. Most of my family never worries about their kids. Isn't that something? I cannot go next to my cousins. So kill me. Let me roll over and die. When I go, don't let my writing go with me. Let it stay with you. I know people are getting tired of reading about my blank life because I am. I can't take it anymore. Someone kill me. Get it over. I'd rather die and be remembered than live and be forgotten. So when I turn to dust, don't let my writing turn to ashes." Now tell me that young man doesn't have something important to say. The next poem was written by another brother author, Preston Davis, who was 16 at the time. He says, "Young man, you are just like your father. The resemblance is uncanny. You have the same face, your bodies have the same shape, and you walk as if you took your first steps from the same place. Your voice has the same pitch. You two have the same hobbies, and you adorn the same attire. Well, I'll be damned if you're not him. Good sir, I am not like my father. We look and sound the same. The resemblance stops there. I walk with a purpose. He walks to move his feet. I like art and music, and he prefers sports. I dress for success, and well, he dresses so that he isn't naked. Good sir, with all due respect, you'll be damned, because I am not my father, nor would I ever want to be." And Preston Davis now is a college student who comes back to the Writing Institute every summer to help mentor the younger students. Another key point that emerged from our work is the need to cultivate voice and agency. Dr. Morell shared an example with us that shows the impact cultivating voice and agency can have on the engagement and learning of African American students, which I'm now going to share with you. Dr. Morell and his colleagues asked high school students from a largely African American community in South Central Los Angeles, "How is the current economic crisis affecting life at your school?" Now, many of these students have been described as disaffected, disengaged, and low achieving, but these young people spent time after school, on Saturdays, and in the summer collecting surveys of over 1,000 people, interviewing people in the neighborhood, searching statistical databases, learning how to become filmmakers, shooting, editing, and distributing a video, creating PowerPoint presentations, writing reports, and traveling around their community telling people what is wrong with their school system and how they would like it to be fixed. To see the students' work, you can visit the link on the slide after the session is completed. So this is the power of voice and agency. Students are so motivated to develop their literacy skills that they'll give up most of their free time because the work they're doing is purposeful. They can see that purpose, and by developing these skills, they feel empowered to make demands and to change their communities. On this slide, we have a list of tools you can use to teach students, or that you can teach students to use, that will cultivate voice and agency. And as you can see, all of these tools tie in very well with the traditional forms of literacy that we are already trying to teach students in school. So here's a short video showing how one graduate student working with a school librarian used social media with fourth graders to connect literacy with science. It also demonstrates how social media can be used to develop agency and voice. Research shows that the critical teaching of popular culture can produce powerful academic and social results for African American male youth. So what do we mean by popular culture? Dr. Ernest Morrell defines it as an area of compromise between the mass culture of our society and the people's culture. In this position, popular culture provides a terrain of ideological struggle between the mass culture and the people's culture in the form of film, music, mass media artifacts, language, customs, and values. This makes pop culture really relevant to students' lives. And because they're interested in it and constantly surrounded by it, they develop the skills needed to process and comprehend it fairly easily. We can and should take advantage of these processing and comprehension skills by helping students learn to transfer them to the literacies we're already teaching in school, like textual literacy, information literacy, technological, and media. Popular culture provides a forum for the critical examination of social and political issues, as I'm going to demonstrate with an example in just a minute. And finally, pop culture can motivate African American male youth to start creating content, not just blindly consuming it. And through their own creations, they can take social action by producing their own films, music, and etc. to improve their own lives or the lives of others in their community. But of course, you can't just turn over a bunch of cameras to the kids and expect them to start creating their own critical content. We first need to teach them to critically analyze media, so Dr. Morrell usually does a few activities with them before they get started. He starts by asking, what does it mean to be cool? What does it mean to have power? How are you constructed as an idea? What assumptions are people making about you, and do you like those assumptions? Then he presents some images like these. So here we have two images. One is more popular and one is more prevalent. There are far more professional black men than there are rappers or gang members. But what do these pictures say about what it means to be a black man? The first image is hypermasculinized. The gun in the picture is the same size as 50 Cent's head. He's also depicted as sweaty and half naked. Most students may not be aware of it, but this is an image of black men that goes back to slavery. So this is an image that's popular, but it's also one that kills people by promoting a certain type of lifestyle as desirable. When students understand this, they get angry, and that gives them the understanding that the desirability and popularity of this type of image needs to change, and they also will have the motivation to try to change it. On the other hand, what does the picture on the right say about what it means to be a black man, or what it means to be powerful? How often do we see images like this one on TV or in the news? We need to produce counter stories and images to combat the first image, and students can and should be doing this by getting the cameras, writing poems, and letting people know how many young black men are actually doing good in the world every day in every class. The last strategy I'm going to discuss with you is connecting with the broader community. There are two important aspects of this: forming collaborative partnerships with like-minded community organizations and engaging mentors. Partnering with community organizations like the public library, churches, the YMCA, local museums, and others has a lot of advantages. First, you can provide your students with more services at little to no cost to your school, something that's really important now as everyone is facing budget cuts. You can also make sure that you're not duplicating the services provided by other institutions and therefore spending money on something that's not needed. And finally, you can connect families with organizations they may not be aware of, but which could provide them with needed services. Engaging mentors is also really important for providing students with role models who can pass on knowledge about both academics and life in general. Now, we tend to think of mentors as students that come in, or as adults that come in on a regular basis over a period of time. But you can also engage older or more experienced students as mentors. Mentors can also be temporary in the form of guest speakers and workshop hosts who might have knowledge to pass on about a specific subject. We have one more short video to share. This one focuses on connecting with the broader community, specifically connecting university students and elementary school students.
I'd like to share one other example of connecting and creating this network of support. Durham School of the Arts, which is a school in Durham, North Carolina, partnered with students at North Carolina Central University, with people from the Duke Community Partnership, and with the librarian there partnered also with a African-American male teacher at her school. And the students formed a black male student reading group, and they read Kekla McCoon's Rock in the River. For the students who weren't unable to read the text because their reading levels were too low, the teacher actually provided the audiobook. The librarian and he got copies of the audiobook so the students could listen to it. So the NC Central students came in, the teacher worked with the students, they had a discussion, and then using funds that the school received from the Duke Partnership, Community Partnership, they actually Skyped Kekla McCoon into the classroom for the young men to talk with her about her work. And the librarian and the teacher reported that these young men were so engaged with this author, and these were young men who in many cases had not even completed a book. And so again, that idea of creating that network of support, reaching out to community organizations and partnering with them to be able to provide literacy instruction and literacy support that you might not be able to do on your own. So we've come to the end of the presentation, and I want to just do a really short recap. Again, reminding us that setting high expectations is important, utilizing instructional strategies that are culturally congruent, powerful texts that reflect the preferences and needs of African American male youth, connecting reading and writing, making sure that we are cultivating voice and agency, that we're giving them a purpose for doing the things that we're asking them to do. Building on that connection between popular culture and literacy development, and somebody put in the chat that teachers at their school frowned on that, so that's why we've got the research here. We want you to find the research and to read that research and to share it with your colleagues. Connect with the larger community. Develop strong school library programs and partner with school librarians and with public librarians. And I'd like to end by reminding us that we need to be courageous. Invariably when we present on this topic, someone says, well, we just can't focus on African American males, it's not fair. What about the other students? We're not suggesting that the other students' needs be ignored, but what we are saying is that we must make addressing the literacy needs of African American males a priority. The data are clear, inequities exist, and these inequities are negatively impacting these young men's lives and their communities. As Dr. Morrell reminded summit participants, more black males died in the last decade in the United States from gunshots than from all the casualties in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan combined. This is not inevitable. This is a choice. As someone else said in the chat, when we're talking about these inequities, we can't overlook the need to talk about white privilege and about the systemic racism that exists in some of the institutions in our country. It's not a topic for today's presentation, but we do recognize that, and if anybody would like, I can give you a list of readings because I do have that discussion with my students in my classes. What we can do today and what we have to take away is that we have to have courage to form relationships with these young men, to provide them with the tools they need to take action in their lives and in their communities, to examine our instructional practices and to change them to be more culturally congruent, to recognize that they're not working and begin to consider why they're not working. To demand that school boards and library boards provide the same level of funding for these young men as they do for men in other communities. In other words, we need to take action. We've provided some selected resources here for you. The first one there is the website that resulted from the summit. We have lots and lots of resources there for you, including other research, lists of enabling text. I saw lots of questions about, could you give me some more suggestions of enabling text? We have some of that information on the website as well. Amanda has also developed a free professional development resource for school and public librarians that you can access there. It has 10 modules and specifically focuses on what librarians can do. And then finally, we have our contact information, and we want to thank the Bugg Elementary and Club Boulevard Magnet School, and now I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly.
Thank you, Sandra. I just want to reiterate, because I know those past few slides went by quickly, we will be emailing the slides out to you, so don't worry that you missed something. You'll be able to browse it at your leisure. I do want to thank our presenters, Dr. Sandra Hughes-Hassel and Ms. Amanda Hitson, for sharing their work with us today. And I also want to thank you for your attendance and participation. If you would like to receive a certificate for continuing education credit, you can go to the URL on this slide, which I'm also pasting in the chat box, and complete the form there. There's our staffer, Leslie Richardson, who has been helping us with tech support throughout this, will email you a certificate. This will count as 1 hour of contact time. We just put that you spent 1 hour with us on here, and then whoever you submit your credit to will determine how much that actually translates into when you're applying for a license renewal. In most North Carolina school districts, that's going to be 0.1 hour credits, but it's going to vary depending on where you are. We have recorded the session. We are also going to save the chat transcript and go through it and mine all of the great ideas that you all have shared today. Once we have posted all of that online, you're going to receive an email with a link to that. You'll also receive the email with the slides from today. And then if Sandra wants to share those resources about institutional problems with you all, then I will make sure that gets out to you as well. In addition, the set of modules that Amanda made, she is also developing into an online course through LearnMC. So if you're the kind of person who needs a little bit more guidance rather than working through those on your own, we will be able to share that. I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Sandra for just a minute.
I just wanted to formally thank everybody for coming to the webinar, but I also wanted to let you know that all the resources are found on the end of the presentation that Kimberly is going to email to you, and that since summer is coming, I think it's a great opportunity for us all to find these resources and begin to read and begin to understand and begin to continue this dialogue. So thank you very much for participating today, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Sandra. If you want to receive information about future webinars from LearnNC, please go to learnnc.org and click the email updates link on the left side of the page. You can also just search for us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at LearnNC. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.